I am joined tonight with both our director, Aaron Posner, who is also the co-adaptor of the show, and one of the assistant directors for the show, who also is our apprentice, our artistic apprentice for the season, Shana Laski. Thank you guys both. So since we have a lot of students here, lots of members of our team performance company, this is our team night tonight, so there will be lots and lots more teams joining us very soon. We wanted to invite Shana to join us as well because Shana is a young career director, so that you guys can hear from both people that are established like Aaron, as well as people who are in the early stages of their career. Aaron, as a starting point, I think a lot of us have read about the show, but will you talk to us a little bit about the birth of the show and this incarnation?
This particular production is the third incarnation of this version of the Tempest, which is the third production of the Tempest that I had done it originally in the 90s, in the early 90s. For me, every Shakespeare production I do, it's about how do I form a relationship with this play? How do I take this really interesting, worthwhile piece of work and listen to what it is, try and see it with maybe some fresh eyes, and see what it says to me and what I have to say to it. And so, at different times in my life, I have very different relationships with different plays. When I started thinking about this one again about 10 years ago and doing so with my friend Teller from Penn and Teller, we both started talking about what we loved about the play, how it moved for us, what it made us think about. And this led slowly in an evolutionary way to what you're going to see tonight. It had to do with Tempest is often viewed, this is about a magician, but it's Shakespeare's last play, so it's really him saying goodbye to literature, or it's him saying goodbye to art, or it's him saying goodbye to his powers as a dramatist, or it's sometimes it's viewed in various, you can put a lot of different frames on it. We thought we would see what would happen if we treated the magician like a magician. We were really radical and thought like maybe if there's a magician at the center of it, maybe magic could be at the center. And that led us to a conversation about a kind of homespun, kind of island magic that's felt to Teller similar to this guy named Willow the Wizard, who was a traveling tent-show magician in the Southwest in the 1880s. There's a couple generations of them through the 1930s. And then that led us to, well, if you're in a kind of Dust Bowl, Old West, beat to crap carnival kind of feeling, don't you want Tom Waits to do the music for that? Because who better? And since Teller had worked with Tom Waits, we got in touch with Tom Waits and said, how about this idea? And then we encountered the sort of the monster Caliban. How can we find a way to make that unique? And Penn and Teller were working with Pilobolus, the dance company at the time, and Teller thought, well, this might be. So and then there were things about the play that really moved me. There were things about the play that moved Teller, and in a lot of conversation over a couple of years, we began developing this sort of what we have termed a shipwreck magic show. That has become sort of our tagline for it, thinking about it, like a beat to crap magic show on an island, borrowing the energy of early 20th century Dust Bowl traveling back of the pickup truck magic shows as filtered through Tom Waits, the current moment, Pilobolus, and Shakespeare. It's as simple as that.
That's pretty straightforward. Yeah. So this team, I just want to, just so that everybody's clear in terms of what we're talking about, because I want to talk about how you guys divided up duties a little bit. This team, how many of the people involved in this production have worked on it previously?
Dan Conway, who was the set designer who designed all of this, he was with it from the very beginning. He's actually the only other person who came on as soon as Teller and I had really, even before we were done forming the ideas, Dan was on the production.
And I should add, Dan's a local designer. You might have seen him here. You've seen his work probably elsewhere. He teaches at University of Maryland, but at this point, he is actually Penn and Teller's design it. Like, because of this show, he designs all of their stuff.
So he was with it from the very beginning, and then not too long before we ever did a production of it, a young man who you'll see tonight, Nate Dendy, who is part of the Magic creation team now and is playing Ariel. I was the recipient of a variety of emails from people all over the world who knew me through various ways when we started casting the show, saying, "Have you heard of this guy named Nate Dendy?" Because Nate had managed to get anyone he had ever met who had ever met me to write me an email and say, "You need to see Nate Dendy for the show." So, and Nate he started as someone we just cast and has become an integral part of this whole team and the energy of this show. And then Tom Weaver, our lighting designer, came on later, but still quite a long time ago. And Eric Hisson is playing Prospero. He played Stefano the first time we did it.
But he was only in that first production.
He was in the first three, not in Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Liz came on halfway through. Liz, who's our musical director. But so various people have sort of rolled into it over time.
But primarily, it is creative team side, not the cast.
That's right.
So you were working with a large group of people that were stepping into this world for the first time, much like you were, Shana. Stepping into a world that is both fully developed and also going to be new because the way that you tend to work. And before I ask about division of duties, I'm curious, would you share a little bit about sort of your thoughts about how you build with the group of artists that you have as opposed to sort of the the version of a director who tries to find the actor who will do the exact same thing as the actor that did it just before.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is a desire at times to be sort of director / animator. Like, it would be really nice if with everything that you did behaved exactly the way you wanted because you could draw them or control them. That goes with a kind of auteur or visual artist or someone who's going like, I have this grand vision. And if you're a genius artist who has a vision that you just want to impose, there's great work created that way. Outstanding, brilliant work in theater and dance. It's more sort of famous in the dance world or in opera.
But if you guys know Robert Wilson's work, for instance. Like, Robert Wilson is kind of notorious for actually doing things like saying, move from B2 to C4 at the rate of a 7.
Right.
And like, he's literally choreographing every single moment. It is not about bringing your own interpretation. It's the exact opposite of what you do.
I believe, because I need my collaborators in a deep way, because that's the way I work, I believe in building with the people that are in the room. I believe that when the creative process, one of the fabulous things about theater is that it is a deeply collaborative art form. And so I really believe in building with the people in the room and allowing them, encouraging them, opening the door for them to bring the best of themselves and what they have to offer. There's no better, there's all sorts of examples of it in this production, but none more stark than Eric Hisson, our Prospero, who he is the actor I've worked with the most, maybe of any actor anywhere. He and I did our first show together in 1995 and have done maybe 20-something shows since then, including a number here in town. I cast him as Prospero a couple of years ago when we were first going to do this before the pandemic. But maybe 6 or 9 months ago, he called me up one day and said, I have this idea, there's something in the text that I'm finding very interesting and moving. And I'm not going to talk about it in a lot of detail, but it transformed the way, it's very different than the Prosperos that have done it before. I think much richer and much more unique and grounded deeply in exactly what Shakespeare wrote, but that can go a lot of different directions. So I endorsed it. I helped him take it further, I hope, but that was his impulse and his leadership and where we went with that. And there's all sorts of examples of when the room is working right, the smartest person in the room is the room. And everyone is contributing, and everyone feels that their input is welcome, and it makes the work richer.
To the point, I will say, to Aaron's credit, to the point that even late into the process, there was a magic trick that wasn't exactly working perfectly, and it was a member.
But just to be clear, when a magic trick isn't working perfectly, it isn't working. It's super pass fail.
Yeah, Aaron had said this to me before we did the show, and it was only in working on the show that I went, oh, now I get it. If one single person sees one thing,
Right.
you fail entirely. So, but to your credit, you create the kind of room where there was somebody who was not even involved in the scene, is not involved in the trick, who felt like they had the agency to be able to say, hey, I have a thought. Have you guys considered this? And everybody went, oh, yes, that's it. That's the thing that we need to fix
And
this.
it's all.
So, Shana, this is not a normal, I mean, Aaron said when people are in the room, but we have lots of rooms. And we have a large team of people. In addition to Aaron, there is Matt and Renee, who are the two co-artistic directors of Palabras, who were often working with our Caliban. I'm sure there were separate magic rehearsals going on as well. And you are one of 3 other directors working on the team. Will you explain to us a little bit about what the team of directors, what the team is, the full team of directors, and how you guys divided up duties?
Yeah, I mean, there were, I think in the end, there were 7 people who had the word director in their title somewhere. And so there were a lot of people that had a lot of ideas and were trying to, who were shaping this process. And like you said, there were also a lot of rooms. And so we were able to kind of divide and conquer in that way. So we had Holly Twyford as our associate director, who was really focused on enriching the text within each and every scene. So she was really pulling actors to do really in-depth text work and making sure that everyone knew what everyone else was saying, so that the responses were honest and real and in the moment.
It's a smart idea to get DC's maybe best, most celebrated actors in the person
She's
working on
good.
the text. Yeah.
Yeah, she
Yeah.
has some game.
And then we have Rania, who's really taken the helm on understudies and chronicling what was being done every day in the rooms so that the understudies could come in and pick up right where their principal had left off whenever they needed to rehearse, or if someone needed to be in a different room, then we could always pick up an understudy. And that's what's crazy is that especially people like Nate and Ryan, our magicians, they were often needed to be everywhere at once, and though they are magic, they are not that magic. And so it was really, it was nice to have all the resources and all the spaces so that we could have different things working at once, so that not only was all of the cast utilized and their time utilized as fully as possible in this process, but also all of the people, all of the creative team also had the opportunity to fully devote their time and energy to the thing they were working on, as opposed to trying to balance, like, who's in the hallway, who are we waiting on, who's sitting doing nothing. Like, everyone was always doing something valuable.
It's not a small production.
No.
It's a lot of moving pieces.
I think we had 4 rooms at once was the most.
Yeah, I mean, there's a music director, there is the director, an associate director, 2 assistant directors.
Teller.
Oh yeah, right. Right. 2 directors. Who else am I missing?
Renee
Renee and Matt.
Oh, and Matt. Yes, Renee and Matt, our choreographers. Yes,
Right.
yes.
Yeah, and it makes it, and then in fairness to the actors, and when we try to be upfront about this, sometimes it makes it hard because you're getting pulled from different directions at different times, and you have musical requirements and magical requirements and movement requirements and acting requirements all in the same scene with different characters. So this whole production is a complicated balancing act.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask. I think with a normal production, you could I could say, can you talk to us about how you treat the scenes that were just Shakespeare versus the scenes that have magic or music? But I don't know that there are small moments that are just Shakespeare, but pretty much throughout the entire play, even in the midst of Shakespeare, there are moments of magic or moments of music. How did you do that in the rehearsal process?
Well, I will say that
through layers.
I think that by thinking of it the opposite of what you're saying in some ways. I mean, you're absolutely right that embedded in each scene tends to be movement or magic or musical things that are layered in. but always remembering, and this is not just me, Teller, for all of his fame as a magician, when I first met him, he was quoting long past, he does actually speak, maybe even incessantly, and quoting long passages of Shakespeare that he had memorized from the time he was a child, and loves Shakespeare and is reverential about Shakespeare's text and about the poetry. So the way we tried to make it work was, no matter how cool any element of it was, we were always coming back and in service to the text. And that was keeping Shakespeare at the center all the time. Even though, yes, we cut it, and yes, there are certainly moments that might get a little overshadowed by some of the specialty stuff. But we really worked to make sure that the story we were telling was clear, that the text was staying front and center, and that the other elements are in service of that, not in service of that. If you go, Cirque du Soleil is trying to work backwards now. I mean, if people have seen Cirque du Soleil, it's awesome and it's impressive, and they do all this really cool stuff. And they're now trying to work backwards and tell stories, and they're terrible at it. That's me. True. They used to, but not anymore. So I can say what I want. No, but they're not storytellers. They are awesome doer of things people. And so they don't know how to go back and make sure they're telling the story first. And Teller, and even in the isolated tricks, Teller is a storyteller, right? The brilliance of Penn and Teller's magicians is they gave new meaning. They turned in magic tricks inside out, and they gave all sorts of different kinds of meaning to their work as magicians. Actually, my wife, when we saw Penn and Teller's show together for the first time, she said, the most amazing magic trick that they do is that they are wildly liberal libertarians that everybody in the audience loves. They're totally subversive politics that they're embedding into magic. Like, that was maybe the most, there was the meaning that makes their magic so wonderful, not necessarily the tricks. A lot of magicians have come to see this show and gone, this is the best version of X trick I've ever seen. Not because we do X trick so much better than any other magician, but because it has meaning. You will see a couple of tricks they're really good magic tricks, but they are imbued with narrative, with emotion, with humanity, and with meaning, and so they become better tricks through their meaning.
I think the question that I was really asking was more, I'm sure the Calibans, given what you will see them doing, they couldn't do that from day one.
Right.
But in rehearsal, maybe they did. I was going to say, they have to be saying the lines while they are doing these things that are sort of otherworldly in terms of their physical fitness. I would assume they had to build up to that. Or that, some of the tricks, like that
yes.
In the course of the scene work, you go, okay, and then we do the trick, and then we move on from here. Like that, not from day one, you couldn't have been doing the tricks.
And yes, layering is right.
Yeah.
You are putting in one thing at a time, and then you are just always trying to make sure that you're coming back to the story. And that you're coming back, that once you have the thing, you were trying to remember, have the conversation about, and why are we doing it, and what is your intention, and what is your relationship with this person. And I have to say, a lot of it is complicated enough that once we got into the theater, we had about 4 weeks before we got into the theater, and then we had 3 weeks into the theater before we started previews. Once we got here, it would have been delightful to get back to those conversations about acting, but we didn't much.
We had a couple of minutes.
We had several minutes working, but fortunately the actor, we did do that work pretty embedded in the rehearsal room, and fortunately this is such a strong cast that they continue to really grow on their own and deepen and connect with each other. It's also been, I have a very high value that towards collaboration and towards kindness and towards, we're doing a play and it needs courage and generosity to offer it. And there are actors certainly, like in any profession, there are people who are less generous or less courageous or less collaborative. And I try really, really hard not to use those people. And Sarah Cooney, who's the casting director here, an associate artist, and we worked all together really hard on the casting to try and make sure we were casting not only super talented people, but kind and collaborative people, and we did really, really well. because there are all kinds of things that are complicated about this process. And this whole task has stayed positive and can do and on each other's team and supporting each other and growing together at the highest possible level.
So before I open it up to everybody, Shana, since we have a lot of students here, will you tell us a little bit about sort of your path to becoming an apprentice here? And this is your first project to work on as an apprentice.
Yes.
They're not going to
Very
all be
different.
like this.
Yes.
Some of them we will just have tests.
Just people talking?
So I'm curious to hear a little bit about what the process, if you could talk to us a little bit about your background and also what this process has been like for you, what you've learned through it.
Yeah. So I came to Roundhouse kind of on a whim. I moved to DC during the pandemic for a job that did not exist by the time I got here, and it was in the theater, shocker. And so I was really committed to discovering a theater community that I had no connection to, and finding where it was that I could fit in a new city, in a new community, and in an art form that was, especially at that moment, ever-changing, and I had a lot of strong values and ideas on how I wanted to be working. And immediately upon stumbling across Roundhouse, actually through a friend of mine's older sister who worked here, Gabby Hoyt, she kind of talked to me about, she was the literary manager at the time, which was a thing that I was kind of learning about in school, but they don't really have literary management, dramaturgy. These are programs that are more up and coming now, but they are the kind of job that you're like, that's a job, when you finally realize what all goes on to make theater happen in the real world. So I came across Roundhouse through her, and she was just transitioning out of Roundhouse as I was attempting to come into it, and I got in touch with Nason, who's in charge of new work development and literary management here. And he invited me, before I was an apprentice, to work on last year's New Play Festival, which was really exciting for me because, as I mentioned, I'm really into new work development, and that was something I was really interested in. And so he invited me to be a dramaturg on Jennifer, who is leaving, in workshop. And so I got to do a week of new play development with an absolutely incredible cast, an amazing room. It was an all-female team, which was something that was super meaningful for me. And then when I learned it was picked up for the season, I also learned that it also aligned with my becoming an apprentice. So I was really excited to get to work on that again. And then they were like, oh, and the other project's gonna be Tempest. And I was like, okay, great. Like, I've done the Tempest before. Like, I know Shakespeare. Like, I can do this. No, not the same. And I also, to clarify a little bit further, I'm not a director by training. I started as an actor, as many artists in theater that are not actors start. But I came from a literary background. So when I hear Tempest, I think Shakespeare text, like, all right, I can do this. And then I come into the room and there's 50 people and Nate's doing magic at the first read, and I'm like, I'm just flabbergasted. And my only other directing experience was on a two-hander, so there were 5 total people in that room. Different world, and it was such a shift in mindset, and also it was a huge learning experience for me because I had the opportunity the first time in a 5-person room to be incredibly vocal and hands-on, and everyone was so. The room only had 5 people in it, so every voice had a different weight and value because we had this little time. We had a lot more time for just the 2 people doing dialogue, essentially. Whereas on this project, there were so many elements to balance that it was so much more useful and beneficial for me to sit and watch and think and be one of the be a pair of eyes in the room, because this show requires so much attention to detail that can't necessarily be put in by the people that are focusing on what they're doing on stage. And so it was so valuable to have so many brilliant people just watching and making sure that the storytelling was happening in order to support all the other things that were going on in it.
Aaron had said to me early on, I need a team full of people for this. I'm going to need 2 assistants and an associate. And I was like, what kind of show? That's so big. That's such a big team. And then in the process, I started to go, oh, do you need me to sit over there or up there? Because it really is. There's just so many different things that can happen. So we are completely sold out for tonight. As we are for every night with this show, which means we have 2 minutes for questions. I apologize because the front of house staff has been very clear that they really need us to be done. So I would like to give it to one of the teams, if any of you has a question for Mr. Posner about the show. Somebody's pointing somewhere. If not, we will call it.
Or an adult.
You good, sir. I assume you're 14 or 15. Thank you.
Comment and then a question. Comment is, I was here 2 nights ago, but I thought Nate's video was remarkably like data. So it's like the next generation. When I was with Bill and reception, they didn't know Star Trek. They, oh yeah. So the function is this: you dance around it, fire identity, 6 plays for years. Directed, wrote, part of it. And my question is this: I see a lot of outtakes in movies where you look at the outtake and absolutely lovely scenes. Why didn't you make the movie? What was told? It's very interesting. Did you find yourself in looking at color, forcing yourself to say it's really cool, correct? But it doesn't work in the flow of the narrative.
You guys hear this question about were there things that was there magic or other elements that didn't make it in? Yes, there, including one of my favorite, a really impressive trick in which we killed somebody and then unkilled them, which I thought was a really great trick, but ended up being, yes, there was a handful of magic tricks. Plus, there was magic tricks we did in the original production that we cut. We tried some new things in Chicago. We tried some things here. We built a whole bunch of stuff here, and then they made it on stage one time for an hour before I was like, I am so sorry. Thank you very much for all of that hard work. It's all cut. Because that is when Penn and Teller do a magic trick, they get the idea. They build the cardboard version, they build the plywood version, they build the real version, and they build the real version. And that takes usually around a year. We didn't have that time, so we moved a little quicker. Yes, of course there were songs we put in and cut out. There was ideas because as I think this is maybe interesting to see. Always was the balance. Always was back to the text, and always was how do we make the magic and the movement and the music make sure that it's serving and never tipping it over. So a lot of things ended up on the cover.
I will say there's whole really gorgeous, beautiful props that are not in the show.
For sale.
They were made, but they didn't make it into the show.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you guys.